Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Grit Daily Startup Show with your host, Leonard Kim. Today we have Ezra Strauss on the line with us, who's the head of partnerships over at Portal Gaming. Before we get into everything, Ezra, you've kind of had an interesting background. You've been in gaming for a while. You used to work at Immutable. Seems like you have this pretty prestigious career path in the gaming industry. Can you kind of talk more about like what brought you into that industry, how you became a part of it, and what grew you into your current role over at Portal?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me today,
Of
Leonard.
course.
It's lovely to be here and join you today. I started in the games and entertainment industry back in 2017 at a local company in Toronto called Time Play. So I originally started my career actually in capital markets, doing like structured product sales, and I think everyone that goes into finance, or a lot of people that go into finance, kind of find it a bit
Right.
dreary, and they look for something that they're a little more passionate about. And
Yeah.
myself growing up playing, for me it was more sports games, lots of like story based RPGs. Like loved the kind of like cinematic,
Yeah.
character driven nature of video games. Wanted to find a path into like the games and entertainment space, and so I joined Time Play, a company with an interactive platform for interactive media, using lots of interesting like cloud streaming and WebRTC technologies, and also had an internal content studio. So I was like very interested in this like platform plus studio type business. Um, Joined there, and we did a couple of interesting things. We did a deal with Paramount
Oh,
around
cool.
an interactive streaming channel, and worked with like a bunch of big licensors, Sony, Paramount, Endemol Shine around Deal or No Deal, doing like interactive game shows. So
That's
like
pretty
lots of
cool.
different, yeah, lots of like different media and content activations, and like really love like where tech, entertainment, consumer experience all sort of like meet one another. And having been in the crypto market for a while, obviously through COVID, I think that just sort of like amplified, and we saw this like real emergence of consumer applications through the NFT run, and the emergence of like real media and
Yeah.
entertainment, sort of a feel to the industry, and became a little more apparent what pathing a career to where like games, entertainment, and Web3 all meet each other, which brought me to Immutable. So after like 4 years working at Time Play in a BD and strategy role, joined the team at Immutable, first working on the blockchain platform, working on developer partnerships with game studios, helping them launching their games with product and go-to-market strategy. And then also working on ecosystem partnerships and integrating different kind of third-party services into the offering to help developers go to market. And then after that, joined the studio team at Immutable, with a bunch of ex-Riot execs, sort of leading the way, building out Immutable's publishing business. And
Awesome.
so much more hands-on, working with large partners like Ubisoft and smaller indie studios, across the full kind of publishing life cycle, from production through to live operations, which led me to Portal, doing a lot of stuff sort of around like games and Web3, and with a sort of a platform and live operations angle to the industry. So lots of exciting overlap there.
One of the interesting things that I've seen in life is a lot of people who start out their careers in finance, you fast forward 5 to 10 years, they're in a completely different path.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. And for me, it kind of intrigues me because I'm always like, you went from here, you got your degrees and everything in this, but then you move completely over here. Like a lot of people make that jump, but how do you actually get into a field when you don't really have any experience in it?
Well, one thing I'll say, I wouldn't want to be mistaken for a finance degree because I studied history.
Oh,
So,
cool.
so making my way into finance was its own bit of a mistake as
That's
well.
pretty big.
I think it's an interesting path in terms of falling backwards into success almost. No, but I think it's sort of, people look it, like people need to be willing to like take a step back and like really ask themselves, what do
Yeah.
they want to do? Like, what do they want to get up every day and do and think about, and what do they love? And sometimes you take a step backwards to take a step forwards, and to like help yourself carve a path. um, I have like lots of conversations with people all the time about like what that looks like. I think a thing that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Leonard, is lots of people wishing they were doing something
Yeah,
else or something in a bit of a different field. And whether it doesn't even matter if you're an entrepreneur or if you're just trying to carve out a career path working for other people, like there is some like level of risk in being like able to like commit to that vision that you
yeah.
have for like what you want for yourself. And I think a lot of it kind of comes down to that. So whenever I like talk to people about this type of stuff, I try to like instill confidence to like take a risk and take a leap and like really go out and grab an opportunity. And I've seen some amazing like people who are like great friends of mine now through this process of like building relationships around like talking about career paths, really like um, start to like just accelerate their personal growth through that as well. Like it's really
That's
incredible what happens.
That's kind of awesome. I went out on a few dates and I was seeing this girl earlier this year, and she was working at a therapist's office over for the government. And you could kind of imagine what kind of patients that really attracts. And she was around my age, so, in her late 30s, and she was so miserable with life. And she's like, should I go and try accounting? Should I try this? Should I try that? I'm like, why don't you just get a degree and then go move out of the government and work for a regular company or something? You're already in the same process. Like, why don't you just move up? And she's like, no, I hate it so much. So sometimes if you don't take that path, you can really get trapped. And I mean,
Totally.
being in your late 30s and having that kind of epiphany is probably not the best one to kind of have. So it's good that you kind of went out there and made that journey early and kind of going down the right path. Another thing that you kind of mentioned is you have that history degree, right? And I think when
Mm.
you kind of think about games, right, a lot of that is kind of combined into like history, mythology, and so forth, and the storytelling. And I think that's probably what really drew you deeper into that field.
That and in business as well. Business is about storytelling too,
It is.
And I think and I think I only really started to appreciate it. When I grew up growing up, when I thought about business, I thought about spreadsheets, crunching numbers,
Yeah.
sitting at a desk. And I think like as you evolve, as you see people around you move in different directions, you start to learn about how multidisciplinary so many things are, and that there is always an angle to like take your sort of innate skill set and interests and carve a path with that if you like really bet on it. Um, yeah, like I think, like for me, I think what whenever I talk about like what history gave me as a professional in my career, it's like understanding trends, understanding patterns, understanding narratives, crafting narratives,
Yeah.
like looking at how outcomes happen over time in certain situations, and like developing really keen sense of pattern recognition.
Yeah.
I think has like really helped.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of young people, I know when I was young, my grandma would be like, "Do you want to be a police officer? Do you want to go in the army? Do you want to do this or that?" I'm always like, "No, no, no." And then she asked, "Do you want to be a businessman?" And I really thought about it. I'm like, "No, why would I want to just go and wear a suit and go into work?" But once you really get older and you divulge yourself into it, you're like, "Wow, this is so much more fun than what I thought that would be."
Totally. And I will say that like having started in finance, the day I got to shed a suit was the greatest day of my life. Like
Awesome.
I think that, yeah, I think that like you always have this view, but like, and as a young person, like my wife was a studied software engineering, but didn't want to be a software engineer and wasn't sure what to do with it. And fast forward just a couple of years later, this idea of product management is like so widespread. And
Yeah.
she always says, she's like, if this was a thing that was like more institutionalized to university, I could have seen myself doing that. And so I feel like it's also partially on like the institutions trying to train people and develop people to like help kind of figure out how you can transfer skills that you have into these other venues. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting area.
Yeah, and for the schools in itself, they're a little bit slower on that path to really go and drive change. They take initiatives, but I mean, like a social media program might come out like 2 or 3 years after social media becomes popular. With AI emerging, there's some schools with some early adopting programs, but it's going to take some time before that kind of becomes mainstream. Over at Portal, though, you're kind of working on the Web3 gaming space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I don't even know where to start with Web3 gaming. Um,
Okay, let's just condense it down a little bit. You got some distribution challenges in the Web3 space, and there's some things going on with that. And, there's some big challenges out there. Can you kind of elaborate on the specific issues that Portal's kind of addressing in that issue and how your platform is uniquely positioned to overcome those challenges?
for sure. So I think the big thing is, and I'll assume a level of knowledge about Web3 and where Web3 and gaming meet each other. But as we see having worked at Immutable, one of the largest chains in the world, and then the largest gaming chain, one of the things that you really see about the industry is that there are all these kind of like separate economies on all these different blockchains with sets of users, money on chain, NFTs and tokens, and like everything just sort of siloed into these different pockets of Web3. And the vision and mission that everyone has always been excited about is Web3 and interoperability, and the ability for people to like truly own what they have and take that across the internet, and for that to be like meaningful from like a user experience perspective. And so for Portal, when we look at the landscape and we see the fragmentation of Web3 and the amount of capital stuck in these different pockets of different chains, users that are stuck in different chains as they're entering Web3, no matter where it is, for us, we want to help developers tap into users where they already are on chain. And we want to like make sure that then new applications and developers that are trying to build meaningful products and experiences have a place to go to help scale to mainstream user bases, right? And so we really see this issue is sort of like a mix of underlying technology that has been like rapidly improving every year.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, there's like a consumer user experience and marketing question around like, at what point do you kind of take your marketing off Twitter? Do you really go and try and bring mainstream users into your product and see what that looks like, and have the confidence and budget to really go and do that? And so, Portal's really focused on from a product as well as a marketing and user experience perspective, building products that do that, and then also helping developers solve those problems for themselves. And so, it's like, it's a very sort of, it's like highly tangible when you look at, for example, the most recent release of our product called Portal Pay really addresses this directly, right? Where, from this problem set of there are all these users in different places, and if you haven't been on a certain chain, you might not have assets there, you can't pay a gas fee, like all of these weird nuanced technical barriers to just like buying a sword in a video game because of what the backend technology is. And so for Portal Pay, for example, if I'm a developer using Portal Pay, a user, a player who's been on another chain, let's say I'm a developer building on Base, and let's say I want to go and engage users who are like mainly on Ethereum mainnet. What this allows me to do is to accept payment directly from them, though their assets aren't on the same network where my game economy is. Yeah. And so it really helps to like smooth this out. And so for me as a user who's already interacting with the crypto economy, interested in video games that have crypto economies, it makes it like removes these sort of technical barriers. And we see from lots of games and app developers that users at that point of sale churn out when that payment experience isn't smooth and they can't convert from where they already are. So we're really focused on helping games solve that problem immediately.
So a few years ago, I think maybe about 2020, 2021, I was introduced to this horse racing game on Web3. And while I was experiencing that, I did realize that a lot of platforms wanted a different type of token to kind of utilize it. And I mean, if I go to a restaurant and they don't accept my Visa, it's a pretty frustrating experience. So I can definitely see the same thing in the gaming world. When you kind of mentioned technology as well, going out and improving, I think when we think about technology in 2020 compared to where technology is now, it's made a significant difference. I remember back in about March last year, someone said, "Hey, why don't you use ChatGPT for your work?" I'm like, "Okay, I'll try it." And everything is spit out. I'm like, you're going to get as many lawsuits as possible if I go out there and put this out there. But, I've been playing with it the other day, and I was watching videos for about 48 hours on Instagram about, like health, diet, and stuff like that. I put things together into ChatGPT. I made a pretty good summary. Sure, there's a few errors here and there still, and it's working out the kinks. But, I mean, it's day and night. If I tried doing this back at that time, there's no way it would have been able to do it. So technology as a whole is actually emerging pretty well, too. The other cool thing that you kind of mentioned is Portal Pay. You came from finance, and now you have Portal Pay. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Well, and I think what's really interesting about I guess everything I've done in my life has brought me to this point of like where video games meet financial markets.
Yeah.
And I think that we sort of sit at this really interesting intersection of like like content for users that is meant to be entertaining, and like what entertainment has really become.
Hmm.
And when you look at like, I'm a big sports fan, but I also like, I love stock. Like so many of the things that I love in my life have, really reframed themselves around like markets and betting and like
Yeah.
quantified outcomes and all these sorts of things. And I think what's really interesting is like video games have always had that in many ways. Things like EVE Online really kind of show that they're what people call spreadsheet games, these video games that are very much fundamentally about the economy.
Yeah.
And I think that over time, like Web3 does so many things. There's been this narrative, obviously, of like digital ownership and digital property rights. And like that is like obviously a very meaningful concept. But I
Yeah.
think most tangibly, like what the value of ownership actually provides is that for me, as someone that spends lots of time or lots of money, i.e., I engage in the economy of a game very meaningfully, it like protects the data that I've accrued and the things that I've earned or spent money on. And it grants that ownership outside of the game's like servers to me, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that we're at this really interesting point where like what is entertaining about a lot of what Web3 is and games in Web3 is
Hmm.
that there are market dynamics to how these economies work, and that like there is this like great like when game developers sort of look at the opportunity, it's like there's economy at play. There are like whales similar to how like traditional video games sort of work,
Yeah.
but the market dynamics are sort of put on steroids in this like really interesting way that public market does. It's
Hmm.
like looking at volatility in stock prices versus like, the smoothness of theoretically the smoothness of like being in a private market,
Yeah.
right? Is like the difference between being on chain and off chain. And so I think that, games that are interesting and developers who are thinking about this in really interesting ways play into the economy dynamics rather than try to like smooth that out. And so it's like interesting also when you talk about these like kind of like financial markets and then what are the consumer trends, like we see this with sports betting and we see this with stock trading and even with the rise of like crypto trading as like as like something that is interesting for the average consumer.
Yeah.
And I think that we are seeing more and more parts of society start to interact with things that are um, in some capacity speculative. And
Yeah.
so I think that like the ability for people to like get and derive entertainment from a lot of these experiences is partially driven by the market dynamics, not in lieu of it. Um, and so, yeah, it's like a really interesting place
Yeah.
to sit at because then you're kind of like building meta layers of entertainment around this core game, right? It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
So the interesting thing is, back in the day, Steve Jobs says, when you look forward, you can't see really where you go, but when you look in hindsight, you're like, oh, all these pieces kind of mesh together and bring you to exactly where you're supposed to be. So I see that really fitting where you're standing right now, Ezra. And in regards to the gaming ecosystem, I know a lot of gamers and the gear that they collect, they take a lot of pride into it. They value it, they cherish it. It's kind of insane the level of dedication that they have into it. But on the other side, you see some people going out there and selling their gear too. So there's both
Yeah.
sides where there's people who will go out there, get the gear for themselves and earn it, other people who want to go out there and buy it. So getting into that larger economy is really a smart move, and it's probably going to push Portal into the right direction. You've also recently opened up a partnership with a company called Futureverse, right? Can you talk
Yeah,
a little bit more about how that works, the user experience, and the ecosystem of that?
totally. So the Futureverse partnership is really exciting for us in a number of ways. Like the way that you can think about Futureverse is it's a consolidation of several companies, more or less based in New Zealand, um, who are all focused in different ways on building their vision for an open and interoperable metaverse. And what's really exciting about that is there's a Web3 component to what they do. The root network, their blockchain is certainly a big part of this. The future pass, their identity solution is certainly a big part of this as well. And then there's also interesting AI projects around like generative audio and like different things. Like when you think about what it means to create a digital, like an open and sort of digital environment, like
Hmm.
what do you need,
Yeah.
to make that engaging? And so what's really exciting about the Futureverse partnership for us is that we have like very similar visions for what like open and interoperable economies and worlds like need to have, which is where the vision of Portal Pay
Yeah,
as this, payments tool, but it's really like it unlocks liquidity in ways we call it sort of interoperable liquidity,
yeah,
where assets on any chain can be used on any chain, and it really abstracts away these technical the differentiators under the hood. And very similarly, Futureverse is this sort of like it's this like ever evolving mix of different products and experiences and studios, and like there's so much stuff kind of going on in that ecosystem. It's super robust, and it's like the perfect testing ground for us to kind of work with a company with an incredibly ambitious vision, working on a lot of different projects across like music and audio, working with big brands like Ready Player One and Warner Brothers, working with big brands like Reebok, developing interesting AI technology around generative audio with their new Gen AI project, and for us to sit at the middle of driving like the liquidity and economy to make that sustainable, and to like make it easier for users to actually then engage in the on-chain part of how this all works. Because a big part of what we do all believe is that in the end, the ability to own these goods on a blockchain is a fundamentally valuable proposition for what we sort of described before, right? Around having property rights, being able to guarantee ownership, in media ecosystems in particular, having like licensing rights being programmable, and having like royalties off of the back of that be programmable as well. Like when you look at the full economic opportunity around like IP and digital licensing, it's tremendous. And
yeah.
so when you look at like the evolution of digital worlds and digital space, user generated content, and the ability to put that all on chain from like a tooling
Yeah.
perspective and an ownership perspective and an economic perspective, like we see ourselves as the core of the economic layer for how this all works, right? So it's an incredibly exciting partnership because we have Futureverse building some of the core blockchain rails, working on these big brand partnerships, and then Portal Pay sitting there as the central driver for how that economy actually can tap into the broader liquidity base, trillions that are already
Yeah.
on chain.
I think it's kind of huge that you're working with a partner who has the synergies and the same values that you kind of do as well. And what also makes it even more exciting is that landscape where you have all these different places to go and test and prove your product and push it to the limits to make it more durable in various different types of situations. Now, when we kind of think about the developers who are working with Portal and Portal Pay and so forth, what kind of feedback have you been receiving from that community since you've launched?
Yeah, so with Futureverse, the feedback has been great. They're very excited about the fact that we're making it easier. Because I think where the market is today, when we talk to developers, like where the market is today is, the tech is still not quite there for experiences to really scale meaningfully mainstream. Like we still see things like fiat payment rails, for example. There's still like anywhere from 50 to 85% conversion rates typically to get
Yeah.
through like a KYC fiat payment flow, to do something on chain. And in addition, like the I think that like the last 12 months of the biggest leaps that are really going to like break a lot of barriers are the new advancements around wallets. We've seen a couple really exciting companies, and Portal, we actually do have our own wallet as well, a multi-chain wallet that allows you, similar to how Portal Pay operates across all these chains, the Portal wallet does this as well. We've seen a lot of exciting advancements on the wallet side, and we're excited to obviously be trying to like help users onboard into Web3 in like safe, interoperable ways that allow them to meaningfully interact with all these different digital economies. And so, I think that when we look at how this is all evolving, these technical barriers being broken down pretty rapidly, are pretty exciting. And so, getting to work with a partner like Futureverse, who again, like big ambitious vision, is sort of like in the end, if you're not if your vision for the future, or like how you think the future plays out, isn't radically different from what it is today, you haven't achieved much in the way of change. And if
Yeah.
you haven't achieved much in the way of change, you haven't built much in the way of value,
Yeah.
at least from like a technical perspective. And so I think what's really exciting is and there are adjacent categories of technology developing themselves as well. I have lots of friends working in the VR space and have a bit of involvement over there. And, there's a lot of exciting, like the evolution of VR and content and data streaming and everything that is happening in that space will converge here again in like another 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And you'll see the way that, like, again, these experiences are and spaces are experienced differently. And like, we've already seen like commercial tooling and payments in VR change so
Yeah.
rapidly. And the payment experience, like the checkout flow in like the Oculus headset is like pretty good today. And so it's like step by step, as you solve a problem and you make it easier for someone to like buy something, then you make it easier for them to sell that thing, and then you make it easier for them to make a thing for someone else to buy and
Yeah.
sell, and you start to solve these problems. Like, you look back in 10 years and you're like, whoa, like we did quite a bit. And so we're sort of at that stage of like, we've already done quite a bit. There's still quite a ways to go, but the problems we're solving are less infrastructure based problems. And now they're like real consumer problems,
That's good.
which is what's exciting, because right now the blockchain space is in this really interesting sort of middle ground where, the blockchain providers and infrastructure companies are also super close to the consumer. But from like an operational perspective, it remains to be seen whether I, as an infrastructure company, am best positioned to solve consumer facing problems and like really build like great consumer products.
Mhm.
And so I think there is this vacuum where companies who exist in this like consumer layer on top of the infrastructure, building some mix of applications and middleware for consumer experiences, there's like big opportunity to capture in there. And I think we're sort of seeing this mix of like people at the bottom of the technology stack working their way up and kind of
Mhm.
finding what that upper limit is. People starting at like the top end of the stack at the user level, working their way down and finding out what their bottom limit is. And we're sort of in this stage of like people finding the equilibrium, and how that landscape will sort of play out. So it's like a very sort of like the sands are shifting, if you will.
I would guess if I were to take a look at what the 5 to 10 year vision of Portal is, it's to take these blockchain Web3 technologies and get it to people like me or my mom or my sister or brother or whoever it may be, to get them to be able to access all these Web3 technologies. Would that kind of be correct, or where do you kind of see that heading?
You're Leonard, your whole family, yeah, but I think it's the degree to which there is like value in what they're going to get out of that. I think we've seen value in money and payments and remittances and all of these sort of like economic use cases. And like the next derivation of that is, well, what are consumer applications that have those things, those elements, those like economy and payment elements, where like the value is fairly direct and derived from like the core initial value proposition of what crypto and blockchain provides. And from there, I think it's less like, there's been a lot of educating of users around like why we say it's valuable, but you won't really like, no one will believe the value until they get to experience it for themselves. And so like, that's, what it will take is like on this, medium term time horizon, experiences that anyone can kind of pick up and experience and then realize like, oh yeah, like I earned this token over here, and this bakery down the street also accepts it. Like
Yeah,
Blackbird building on Base with their kind of like on-chain loyalty network is a
yeah,
very interesting use case around token interoperability and consumer spending on like everyday purchases, like buying a biscuit, buying coffee.
yeah.
And so there's some like, we're starting to get to this point where like things that people already interact with, people will start to see and feel and like really understand the like next level of value to be delivered to them as a user by the
Yeah.
technology. And that's what's really exciting.
And I think what's really cool is if that bridges gap, like the players who play like League, Valorant, Genshin, that could all emerge and all push up into the Web3 ecosystem, which could just be a waterfall of all this potential new
Totally.
business. Um,
Totally.
One thing I was thinking about is you kind of mentioned Portal Pay. You mentioned a little bit about Portal Wallet. I heard that you've been rapidly working on different things like Portal Explorer and Portal Account. Can you give us a
Mhm.
sneak peek of all these different things that you're working on to kind of enhance that Web3 gaming experience and what that roadmap looks like?
Yeah, for sure. Leonard, there's no shortage of things we're working on, which is the exciting part. Yeah, so when I talk about wallet and account, very much the same thing. Like when we talk about chain abstraction and like Portal Pay makes it easy to just remove the differences between blockchains, the account structure that we've developed is very similar. You know, one of the big problems that needs to be solved to let mainstream users interact with blockchain in safe and seamless ways is like letting accounts that you already use own your wallet and making password recovery
Yeah.
easier, but maintaining true ownership over the keys of your wallet so that it is truly encrypted, it is truly non-custodial ownership, and that you like truly own your assets and they can't be revoked by any central entity or like server owner.
Hmm.
So that's really what we're delivering is this like I show up to Portal as like a user that wants to interact with this sort of like broader platform that's being built out. And you know, I show up, I create my Portal account, and it was as easy as clicking sign in with Gmail. And under the hood, you know, I own this wallet that can own assets across any blockchain, which connects to Portal Pay, which can transact across any blockchain. And I think like very clearly, there's this like very concrete vision of like a user can interact with anything across Web3 through Portal. And that's like really where we want to get to is like from a user perspective, I can go anywhere,
Yeah.
and it's the gateway to the new internet. Like I don't want to. I wouldn't compare us to like Netscape or
Yeah.
anything, but it's the same general premise of like it being the gateway to content in a way that makes it easy to access anything anywhere that it is. And the premise of things being on chain is that they're ownable and interactable. And so it's like very much through that lens where this like wallet and ownership layer become important, right?
Yeah.
And so this like the explorer piece of this all is like how do I as a user, you know, put data into my account that lets Portal understand who I am so that it can surface exciting content and offers and
Yeah.
apps that I'm interested in and like different things for me based on who I am, sort of a recommendation engine, if you will. And I think like um, there's this like interesting question like, well, what is discovery meant to be? Some people want to go and search for things and some people want things delivered to them. And
Mhm.
we're sort of in this quest as a consumer company to really ask ourselves, well, how do people want to discover what there is on chain and what it means to them? And so as much as we're kind of focused on solving these interesting economy and interoperability problems, it's also like, how do you understand who a user is and give them the things that they want, right?
Yeah.
Or let them find things in the way that they want to. So that's sort of what we're doing there.
So I watched a lot of Twitch, and while you're watching Twitch, people are playing games for like 3, 4, 6, 10 hours, and
Yeah.
every now and then they'll take their meals at their computer. And what would be so cool is if you're going out there, you're playing this game, you're earning your tokens, you pull up maybe like your McDonald's app, you order a Big Mac, it arrives at your home, you just earn that Big Mac just from playing games, and you continue on. That would be pretty awesome. I think at least.
100%. And
Right.
like this is, and we've seen Starbucks starting to experiment with blockchain, and
Yeah.
you will see more brands in F&B start to experiment with it because if they can put their users on chain, if they can put their users on chain, but then they're also set up to just like read the data of more users that are on chain. They can give intelligent offers. Like
Yeah.
if like there's a world in which you have like an on-chain streaming platform, you understand who the viewers are, you understand who the streamer is in a much, more in like a much more streamlined way. And like there's a way in which I, the streamer, can like own the ability for a brand to surface like a call to action to order something, and it can be dynamic. The way that like Amazon Prime, like the way that Twitch already has like the Prime ad network already built in, and it surfaces dynamic advertising to users. Like imagine if those things were deeper calls to action that tied back to your wallet, where like it can like read your data on chain and like surface like an oh like we know it's 7 p.m. where you are, and we know that you might be hungry. Like, do you want to order this thing? Yes or no? It's tied to your wallet, something you could pay for. They can give you an offer. Like
Yeah.
things in which where you can like connect the data end to end is like a very interesting proposition. And so like for brands and advertisers, it's very exciting as well, right?
Yeah, it's 6:58. You normally order a flat white at this time. Do you
Exactly.
want to get this order now? Sure, why not? Let's just do it. Like that
Yeah.
kind of integratability, that's going to be useful for a lot of people. It's about time for us to kind of wrap up the show. Were there any final thoughts you wanted to share with the audience, Ezra, or how to find Portal and so forth?
Yeah, for sure. So Portal, you can find us at portalgaming.com. And you can find us on Twitter at PortalCoin, PortalCoin. We've got we've got a couple of exciting things coming up, including a website refresh. So stay tuned for like a lot of like a bit of a revamp of the brand presence as we're rolling out more products through the rest of the year and spending a lot of time on this payments economy and liquidity piece. And that'll include, we've got a Medium blog that you can find if you search for Portal Coin as well, that we're publishing on just different information about some of the work that we're doing. And if anyone in the audience does have questions or is interested, we are active in our Twitter DMs. We always respond. Please feel free to get in touch. I think we're a very fun and engaging team, and our social team loves to kind of hear from people and help people connect in whatever way with Portal they're interested in. So please feel free to get in touch. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ezra, for taking a moment to share Portal Gaming with us. Everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Grit Daily Startup Show. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Leonard.
No problem.